For this image, I wanted to draw some kind of interior scene where there would be a lot of large windows and you could see the outside world from inside. I really like this idea because I can introduce a lot of depth into the scene and at the same time figure out what the inside of the office will look like as well as the outside world for my story. So you see here I'm just trying to block in the basic perspective. Again, I'm not using any perspective grids or perspective lines. So that's why it's important for me to make sure I make these initial shapes to be relatively correct. Putting in some shelving. A little bit of steam shenanigans there. Here I'm drawing in an air conditioning unit, since there are many air conditioning units in Hong Kong and they seem to be everywhere. Even though we're not going to be seeing Jacob's face in this image, I still try and pay a lot of attention to making the figure look nice, since that's generally where most people will be looking. So much like how in a picture of a portrait you would focus most on the eyes and on the hands, in a scene like this I try to focus a lot on the figure to make them look nice. Now I'm starting to block in the basic shapes for the windows, fixing up a bit of perspective. Those are some heavy-duty binders that I think are quite common in office spaces. This is a metal cabinet. I actually have one in my room, so I was able to just quickly glance over and see what they look like. Now I've started to put in some dark silhouettes of something that would be in the very near foreground, since I felt that even once I put in the background outside the window, there still wouldn't be enough depth in the scene. I really like to push the idea of foreground, middle ground, and background in these images, since it draws the viewer in. Again, other than that silhouette layer on top, this is all on one layer, so I can very easily adjust whatever I'm doing. Here, going back to refine Jacob again. They're just duplicating the little tags, since it's a bit of a waste of time if you draw them all manually. And if you get one of them that doesn't look correct, then it really jumps out at the viewer. Here I believe I start properly trying to block in these windows, but I end up going for a different design, not this strange squarish design with long windows beneath it. I actually made the windows on a separate layer, I believe, so because I wasn't too sure if I would like the design or not. I felt that the top left corner was a little bit devoid of detail or any kind of visual interest, so I decided to draw in a satchel or a bag or whatever it's called. Yeah, you see here again I'm redoing the windows, since I really didn't like how they looked before. I was a little bit worried at first, since it looked like a jail cell initially. And again you see me doing the windows again. I think it's important to have the perhaps bravery to just drastically change large elements of your image if you think it's going wrong. That's one of the reasons why I like doing everything on one layer, since it makes it very easy to make those changes. I don't need to be jumping between different layers and figuring out what layer did I draw this on, etc. So here, now that the windows are more nicely spaced out, it doesn't quite look like a jail cell. Looking back on this image, I find that the frames are far too thin and lacking a lot of structure of actual window frames. For this image, maybe it works since it's relatively sketchy, but it's really important to actually study what the true structure of these kinds of things are, especially if it's mechanical or man-made objects. Here I was experimenting a little bit with having no vertical bars on the windows, but I found that it just didn't really work out very nicely. And I believe that's maybe the first time I saved the image. Remember to save your image much more frequently than me. Here working on the silhouette again, trying to make it look more interesting, but at the same time not too distracting. Yes, here I had the idea of having sort of Polaroid images or images which are like photographs which are drying on strings, pinned up on strings, again to give some visual interest and to increase the depth within the image. It's interesting, it was very much an afterthought, and I had not planned to do it at all, like when I first started drawing it, but I find that if you look at the finished image, it's a very important element within the scene. Just there I lightened the middle ground where Jacob is, so that you can more easily see that the foreground is separate from the middle ground, and just added in a notebook and a pen, give it a little bit more homely appearance. Now I've started to work on the background outside the window, so just sort of figuring out how exactly I wanted to do things. I initially had the idea of just having a single street outside the window, but then I decided to go for something a little bit different in the final image. So again, just jumping back, detailing Jacob a little bit more. I don't like to work in a very regimented way, so I don't really divide things into separate steps, so I can feel free to jump between many different parts of the image at once. There I was just putting in a light grey onto the middle ground, so that when I'm drawing the background things won't show through, and I can also get a better sense of the depth. Here you can see that I had decided to in fact put a bit of a street corner there as opposed to a single street. So it's an intersection, so you have a nice sense of depth as the road curves around into the horizon. Drawing lots of billboards. I find that in Hong Kong especially, you can make a scene look very interesting if you have a lot of advertisement, signage, things like that. Just doing some billboards which are a little bit further away, just sort of trying to suggest their existence, not really making them very obvious, but just very lightly putting them in there, so that your eye subconsciously picks up those details but doesn't get distracted by them. And here, just blocking in the windows on the building opposite. I found that I had placed the second floor far too high up the building, so I have to draw it again. It's important to keep in mind the height of real living humans when drawing buildings, especially if you're drawing multi-story buildings. It's a very common thing to accidentally make your floors too high or too low. Here I decided to change up the design of the windows. on the lower tier of building. I'm not sure if this kind of design is common in other countries, but in Hong Kong, especially in Sham Shui Po or Mong Kok, a lot of the older style buildings, you have the lower section coming up from the ground, and then you have the upper section which sort of juts out from the base of the building. Here just adding some more billboards which are facing more towards the camera because the building is looking a little bit bare before. Here just blocking in the light from outside the window into the room. Things like light and shadow tend to have higher contrast when they're closer to the camera, so which is why the interior darks are darker than the outside, but the lights are also lighter than the outside. When I block in backgrounds or buildings like that, like I'm doing in the background here, I like to put the different tonal values on separate layers, just in case I want to readjust them later. But again, like my sketches and line art, they're done very loosely. Yeah, making the light coming in through the window even brighter. Yeah, I'm doing a bit of my favorite rim light. It really adds a lot to the image if you do a bit of rim light like this. It's having bits of light just catching the edges of objects. It really defines them a lot in 3 dimensions, since your eye tends to make up what the rest of the details should be based on what it gets. So here in the silhouetted portion, it's basically just black shapes, but because I add a little bit of bounce light or rim light just catching on the edges, you sort of think that they're 3-dimensional objects. Windows tend to compress the values of whatever is behind them, so things become lighter and less contrasty. So here just using a gradient tool on the radial gradient to try and make some things darker, bring some things close together in terms of tonal value. We're just adding some bloom from outside the window. Yeah, just here I just made a layer straight on top, so now I can just go to town just painting whatever I like, just picking the values straight off the painting and then just painting with those. I find that working this way gives a much more organic feel than if I refine everything into a sketch phase, and then detailed sketch, and then line art, and then colouring, and then shading. It works for things like animation or very specific styles, like a lot of anime and manga sort of styles, but for myself I quite like having this more organic workflow. It sort of helps remove the digital feel of images, so the sort of very clean, almost surgical look that you get from a lot of digital art. This part of the painting process is actually quite fun because you get to see a lot of difference, like just small, it seems like small changes, but when you step back you find that you actually have done a lot of work and it really improves what the image looks like. Yes, Jacob still uses a feature phone, not a smartphone. Now doing my favorite trick of adding a bit of grunge to an image. It's just a basic sort of chalk brush with a few settings like watercolor build up and pen pressure controlling the opacity and flow. So again, just adding it and subtracting it, adding it and subtracting it with the same kind of brush. Now doing it with white. Again, just more painting, more detailing. If you put more details where the audience is most likely to look, then it can save you a lot of time, since you can then leave other areas less detailed. Really trying to help define the shape, structure and material of the various objects in the room by just using a lot of line work, like a lot of hatching or just little nicks and imperfections on the surface. There we have the finished image. After I had stopped recording, I actually went back and decided to try using the gradient maps again to try and make it look a little bit more pretty. And this time it seemed to work a lot better. So there we have it. Thank you for watching.